You are now listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc, sharing insights through real, honest, and practical ways to improve your communication and relationships. Featuring your hosts, Dr. Pamela Kreiser, Meredith Edwards-Nagel, and Teighlor Polindo. I'm very excited to introduce our guest today. Her name is Arianna Caligiuri, and I have had the pleasure of knowing her, or rather being known by her, for my entire life. Since day one. Yes.
Okay.
So we have a long history, but today we are just wanting to hear from you and learn with you as we talk and continue our conversation on grief. And I know you have a lot of personal experience with this. I was looking at your website, Arianna by the Sea, and I see you have a podcast coming out soon.
Yes, it's in the
pipeline.
preparing stages.
But if you could tell us a little bit about your work. I know you do a lot of different things.
Well, I love anything that has to do with wholehearted living and authenticity that equates this thing for women that I think is just really empowering. I adore working with women. I also enjoy families and people of all cultures. I have lived most of my life actually in other cultures besides my own, so I have a real honor for cultural awareness and respect for each individual because we all have our culture of origin. But what I'm doing is anything that can help people find out who they truly are. I really love and adore somatics and breathwork and yoga and touch therapy. I walk with people in their life through different seasons. And when I say that, I like to accompany them as a spiritual director as well as a grief coach. I enjoy dancing. I teach as well. Ballroom dancing, but mainly swing dancing, which I think is a dance that brings a lot of joy to people. I have this deep passion for authentic faith and not speaking it, but actually living it. Mm-hmm. And I think it comes in all different shapes and sizes and languages. And I have, as I said, lived most of my life in other cultures. So I really love the culture that I have found as my own, which is very international. And I think that women have a beautiful culture that we get to discover from the day we're born until the day we die. This awareness of becoming a woman in our own skin. And a lot of times there's pathways of healing and deep pain and deep suffering that allows us to actually discover who we truly are. That the journey is not always joyful, and the journey is not always peaceful, and the journey is not always as cookie cutter way that we think it's supposed to be when we're children and we dream. And I think that dreams are this avenue that allows us to actually become fully who we truly are. So just a little bit about myself. I have 4 daughters. I really, really love that I have been a mother of 4 daughters. Not that I don't love sons, but I was given 4 daughters to nurture and raise them in 4 different countries. It's very interesting that they were raised in 4 different countries and I had 4 daughters. And I've learned so much from them. They've been my teachers through my whole life. And I remember when they were little, I never wanted to be the mother that controlled, manipulated, or told them what to do, but I wanted to be the mother that brought security in them being my little sisters. And that one day we would do life together as 2 women. And one of my daughters has recently passed to the other side. And that was an incredibly hard call to let go and accept that she actually died. Like, she really died. Her body is no longer here. Although I know through a lot of my own grief work that her soul lives on and is with me always. Yeah. So this is how I come to you today.
Thank you for being here and thank you for sharing She was a beautiful human. I had the pleasure of knowing her, and you and her are like no one I've ever met. So.
Thank you, Tay. Oh. Yeah, this thing we call grief, grief is like organic. You can't ever control it. You never know when it's coming. You never know when it's going. But it's there. And I've learned that embracing grief can be really good. And looking at it as all things, all emotions that we experience are actually for our goodness. And I think that to understand the goodness of grief is to understand the joy of healing, is we can't truly heal unless we choose to embrace our grief.
So you said we can't control grief. Mm-hmm. And I think we might try to.
Oh, absolutely. They not only try to control it, they suppress it because they're afraid of it. And there's so much fear around grief because of the unknown. And fear comes a lot when you don't know how to handle the feeling of being paralyzed or shocked or without or questions of confusion. And there's no answers except just to be in the grief. And who wants to be in grief?
Yeah, that sounds scary.
I also love the power of breathwork. And I want to say that because of anxiety, confusion, and grief are found usually right here in your body. And so somatically understanding the lungs, the heart, and the breath, that a lot of times a tool that I have used over and over again is just deep breathing and breath work to heal the thoughts or the emotion or the anxiety or the confusion or being stuck or paralyzed or I'm never going to be able to live again the same way. And breath work has always been an incredible tool of grounding myself and bringing me back to center of what's the truth, that my mind is taking me to a place that is confusing what's the truth. And breath work has always been a powerful tool for me.
So you're saying you've used the breath work previously, but now the new application is in the grief?
Yes, I've used it before, my deep grief and complicated grief that I've experienced, and now absolutely, daily.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. This is tool that is invaluable for anybody, no matter where they are in their life, of pain and suffering and grief, to learn how to breathe through those emotions and those thoughts and what mental illness often brings and the anxiety levels. Breath work is amazing, and even more so, I think, when we see it as a tool of medicine for my soul.
Is it just deep breathing, or is there is it something you study and learn about, like a particular method?
Yes, there's both. Anybody can learn the value of deep breathing, just deep belly breath. But there's also a lot of, when I say breath work, just like we would in yoga, there's all kinds of poses. Well, in breath work, there's all types of different breath, how would we say, recipes. There's a certain type of, 3-count breath, 4-count breath, belly breath, lion's breath. There's all different types of breath work that you can learn that works with you for healing.
Is there any in particular that gives you comfort?
Oh, I like them all. But the easiest for me, I'm also a meditator. I love to meditate, believing that's also a powerful tool of healing medicine. But one of my favorite breath work, and very simple, is an inhale, exhale, count to 3. So I will stop myself and I will inhale, what's the truth? I will ask myself, what's the truth? I want to inhale truth. And I hold it for a count of 3 and feel my belly. And then I exhale. The truth is. And that's one of the easiest, beautiful tools. And I do it 3 times. The power of 3 is not only invigorating, but complete. There's a completion there.
I never heard that before.
So then when you're doing this strategy, I assume it's in the moment because we can't control grief. So you're doing this, and what is the effect then for you?
Well, first of all, it calms the nervous system immediately. And then it calms my mind. And then my soul. So that's the three parts that it's almost immediate. Whereas oftentimes medication and other things we do takes a while, but the breath work there's an immediate response in your body.
So is grief hitting all of those areas for you then?
Sometimes, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's all three, Meredith. Sometimes it's only my mind. Sometimes it's only my heart, and I cannot control my emotion. And other times my spirit and my gut and my soul just doesn't even know who I truly am anymore because I'm stuck in that grief.
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to the reality, what's the truth? The truth always sets free. What's the truth? Not what do I think is the truth. And that's my question I ask myself a lot.
Yeah.
Because grief can paint pictures that aren't true. Grief can also give us what we need. It truly depends on how we respond to the grief.
So let's talk about both of those things. So first you said grief paints pictures that aren't true. So what does that mean?
Well, for example, there's the stages that we know of loss and stages of grief. And a lot of times there will be this denial that comes. That's part of the stages. I'll use it as an example. But it paints a picture that's not true when I walk in denial. And so, but I need to allow myself that because it's part of the stages of healthy grief. So there's almost like this yin and this yang of, well, okay, I'm in denial of the fact that, let's just, for example, well, my daughter really died. Like, no, she didn't. No, she's coming back. And that causes almost crazy thinking, but it's part of the process of healthy grief. But it paints pictures that aren't true, and we can either stay stuck in it or we can process through it. So I believe grief is not, I'm going to get to the other side, and it's not that I'm going to stay back, but I'm just going to walk and work my life through it. However long it takes. Even if it's the rest of my life, I'm not in a hurry. I don't believe that healing grief has any time frame.
With this large of grief for you, do you have people in your community that have been supportive in a certain way or breathed with you in a certain way, for lack of a better word, that you have found is helpful in your grieving process?
Yes, very much so. I couldn't do it alone. You know, when they say it takes a village, I truly believe that everybody in their grief path has different needs. My need was truly community and needing others, and there have been specific few that have truly walked in the deep, dark night of my soul with me. And for me, I don't think I could even be here today or do the work that I'm doing if it wasn't for others. Yeah.
So what does that look like to walk with you?
Well,
As we all kind of need to learn how to support people.
Yeah.
You know, we need to learn how to go through grief, and we also need to learn how to support others. So what, in those moments where you felt supported, what were the things that they were doing or not doing that you felt supported by?
Oh, there's so many, but I will pick a few that were very valuable. Just coming and sitting with me. I didn't want to talk. I didn't know what to say. But having that special someone sitting right with me on the sofa for hours, I just couldn't talk. But they were right there with me. And if I wanted them to hold my hand, they would hold my hand. And I loved the presence. It was really powerful. They weren't trying to fix me. They weren't trying to give me answers of how to heal my grief. They simply were just being with me. That's what I actually love, to be with others. But I received that so well. oftentimes acknowledging when somebody, whatever their emotion is, they're feeling the situation, I see that. Sometimes when we speak the word of the knowledge of the truth of their grief, that's all they need, is to be seen and witnessed. Sometimes when they would ask me to tell stories about her or say her name, it's so healing. And to be in a safe place where nothing was expected of me but just to be, I think is really hard for our culture, but has been a big part of my healing. Yeah. And the breath work is one of the tools I've used. I also love grief groups and women's circles, and not only started some, but also belonged to others where I could just be really empowering for me. I believe in, if people need therapy or coaching, or if that's something that they don't need, it's often hard when you're in a paralyzed state of grief to know what you need, and it just takes time. Yeah. So I think as we are people that love to facilitate and assist others in grief, everybody's different. Yeah, one of the greatest tools would be, for me, was people being with me. Sometimes people would show up with food and just leave it on my doorstep with a note. That was truly healing for me, nurturing. It's very hard to nourish ourselves when we're in grief. We usually abandon ourselves when we're in a time of trauma or grief. So it's beautiful when you can bring nourishment without any expectation.
Were there some things that you could tell our listeners you would not recommend?
To tell them that everything's going to be okay.
Don't say that.
90% of the time, that's what we do. I'm so sorry you're hurting. I'm so sorry for your loss. Everything's going to be okay. And those words are some of the most emptiest words for a griever. Whatever grief you're in, whatever trauma you're in, I just want to hear, I see you. That's really painful. It's really painful.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that pain? Do you want to be with that pain? The invitation of acknowledgement is really important. I really believe that with my whole heart. What not to do? To expect that they're going to get over it in the time you think they're supposed to get over it in. Because their time frame is not yours. For me, I'm dealing with death, but there's all types of grief. Oh, well, it's been a year, so you should be okay. Oh, it's been 5 years. You should really be okay. Well, who says we should be anything? And so I think that hurts the griever when you have your expectation upon them and your time frame and your opinions and your everything's going to be okay. I feel like all that is about you, but when you have that griever with you, or that dear friend or family member, maybe all they want is for you to just sit with them, hold their hand, rub their back, silence, play their favorite music, no expectation of what you think they need.
And that's really helpful advice. I feel like that's one of the things I struggle with most. Is like, well, what do you say? Because nothing I feel like you could say would be comforting. It's always good to know what not to say as well.
Yeah. What about the saying that is often, call me if you need me, right?
Yeah.
Oh, call me if you need me. Do you know that 90% of the time they're not going to call you when you say that?
Yeah.
So I truly encourage you, if you have anybody in your life and they come to your mind and your heart, you call them. You don't ask, oh, tell me what you need and I'll make that need for you. What do they need? What can I give to them that they need? You know, or do they need a phone call, or do they need food, or do they need me to go with them? You'll know inside we've got this inner compass in each one of us that guides us. What do you think, Meredith?
Is there something just that's important to know about grief? Like this beast, I don't have another word for it, but sometimes I think of grief as a beast that I want to hide from. And you're talking about things that take a lot of bravery to do. So what do you think when you're in your grief support groups, or in your when people are in community with you, or as you go through your grief, what would you like someone to know is important about this thing that's just always there? Because it's not like you can go to lunch and it's not there, and then you pick it back up after. It's always with you. So what would you like people to know about it? That's just this thing. I know what the name is grief, but it just feels like something bigger, like a bigger thing. I can't put a word to it, but
Yeah, it is. It's like a monster, you know? You never know from what corner it's going to come. I mean, yesterday I just had an incredible, really hard day. And sometimes we can engage in that monster in the moment, and sometimes we have to wait. And that's really hard when you're in acute grief, like it's just happened. And as you process through grief, sometimes it's a little, it becomes like a muscle to learn, I'm going to hold this and wait until I can process, or I can talk about it, or I'm going to go to lunch, and is this person safe? I think that the question in grief for a lot of us that's important is, am I safe with this person in my grief? And if I'm not, I'm going to hold my grief until I'm safe. And I think that takes a lot of self-control and a lot of self-awareness, because a lot of times we just want to throw up our grief to everybody, and then sometimes it's just like, and then the responses are more hurtful. And so I think it takes sometimes time, and sometimes you can't when you're in acute grief. That's why I think it's really important to be with a safe group of people, whether it's your family or your friends, or a group that feels safe. I visited 10 different grief groups when I first lost my daughter, because I knew I needed a grief group, and it took me 10 till I found one that I felt was really safe with.
What was it that made you know it was safe?
I could go and sit there and not have to answer any questions and feel completely seen and respected. I didn't want to have to answer questions that I wasn't ready to answer in the circle, and I enjoyed that very much.
David, who we spoke to in the episode previous from this, talked about the nod of someone that's in a similar grief as you, and saying that sometimes in those support groups, I don't think I'm saying exactly how he said it, but you don't always need words, but just the nod of someone that's in the same grief can be enough. Is that kind of what you're touching at?
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. The nod, the eyes, the sense of, oh, they understand without words. Yeah. And if we're going to cry, crying often makes people feel uncomfortable. It might make you feel uncomfortable, right? But I'm crying because I'm crying, whether I need to cry, whether I feel the emotion of crying, and crying is a healthy emotion, and we're afraid of it at times in our culture. And being able to have the freedom to cry like I did in this group, and just tissues were given, not, why are you crying? Can I help you stop your tears? Please, you'll be okay. Nothing, just a tissue, and allowed me to cry however long I needed to. I think that's incredibly valuable, and a place of serenity in my healing.
Glad you found that.
You know, we say tears are the words that I cannot say. And there's so many words I cannot say, you know, and I love the scripture where it says, you know, that God, He holds each one of our tears in a bottle. A dear friend of mine, a Jewish woman, gave me, I don't know if I showed you that, Teighlor, but I was given this beautiful, I wish I had it right now, but this beautiful bottle that's called a teardrop jar. And in the Old Testament, there is a scripture that talks about how the women of old, when they would weep, they would carry around a teardrop bottle. And what it would do is they would put their tears, it's so precious, in this bottle. And at the end of the night, they would put it outside their front door. And in the morning, the tears were dried up, because this was in the Middle East where it was hot. And then the next day, so for 40 days, they would walk around with their tear, and everybody knew they were either a widow or they had had loss. And people honored them in their space of grieving. And I love the scripture that says that every tear that we cry, He has in a bottle in heaven for us. And when my dear friend gave that to me as part of my process in my first year after my daughter passed, I would carry that with me. I felt it was very significant. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah.
I never knew
So
that
you
story.
lived in a number of different cultures. Do you think that your background in living in those cultures helped you have such a, I don't know, I'd say well-developed understanding of grief?
Yes. I think that's a very great question, because living in all those countries and really diving into each culture and each language and why they do what they do, they're not afraid. They're very accustomed to grief. And in our Western North American culture, we're not only afraid of it, we try to put it in a shoebox and put it away when we don't want it and open it up when we do. And so, yes, these other cultures have truly shaped and molded me to be very open to embrace emotions as a whole and the honor of the moment. And they have healthy types of grieving processes. Yeah, good question.
So what would be considered healthy? Just a couple examples.
In Greece, country I lived in for 10 years, the women will automatically wear black for 40 days, so you know that they're grieving, but they also go every day to visit the dead. And they have the girls, they have their women go, their closest women. There's always going to be 3 or more that go with them to visit wherever their beloved one is laying. And they put their hands and their feet on the earth without shoes to feel the presence of their loved one. And I think that that is a somatic practice that brings a lot of healing to the broken heart. I think it's phenomenal. And we know that the Jewish tradition, you usually wait a year after they have passed and you put rocks, stones of remembrance, on top of their tombstone. So every year you come back and you bring a rock upon their tombstone, which lets them know that not only were you there, but that there's this rock of salvation, the rock of where they are. And that act brings this wholeness of, you have this earth and thing we call a rock, which I believe that the earth has great energy for our souls and our bodies and our minds. And we all have energy, and that's how we're made. But when you put that rock there, what goes from that person who's passed to you who've lost them, there's this sense of connection. They have been buried, whether they're buried, in a grave or in the earth, or they've been cremated, or at sea, or everybody has a different process of what happens to the body when they die. But there is this circle of life, and I love that. They put the rocks as this circle of life. I just think that's phenomenal culturally. And they're not afraid to cry. They're not afraid to grieve. They're not afraid to talk about it. And the Spanish, when I lived in Spain, oh my goodness, they're just like the most, exemplifying culture. And they just talk about everything, and, oh yeah, well, she's dead and he's dead. And we don't talk about it like that. But we have a hard time with, well, they're passing, or they passed, or they've crossed over the veil. Or, for example, saying the name, I learned that from Spain, saying the name of your loved one. And I still use it in current tense, because she's not no longer. She still exists. She just has another way of existing, which is her soul. She's no longer in body form, but I believe that she lives forever, or anybody that passes over the veil. And I love that. So I still talk. Shira is with me. It's not that she once was. And I think that's a very psychological, healthy process. What do you think about that?
I love it. I have a hard time with that, because there are certain people I can't even say their name. So I don't think that I am where you are. But I love that you can do that, and maybe one day I will.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that are really hard for me to do. But every morning I say good morning to her at the same time. She passed in the morning, so every morning at 6:32, I wake up, and it's one of my spiritual rhythms. I say, good morning, Shira. I know this is when you pass to the other side. Do you have a message for me today? I want to hear what you have to tell me. And I do that every morning. And so I believe in the power of ritual and rhythm, and that's part of my healing. And it's not always been easy to say her name or tell her story. Mm-hmm. But I know that it's very healing. Yeah.
Is there something you would like to share about Shira? Totally fine if you don't want to.
One thing?
Or anything.
Larger than life. She'd walk into a room and she would light up the room. Like everybody would want to talk to her and connect to her. And she was just natural, just very much who she was in her own skin, and always that way. As a little child, she just bounced into the room, and there was Shira. And she just really loved life and loved people and loved God and lived a very full life. And this legacy that she's left is so beautiful. And I'm, as her mother and her, we used to call each other besties, you know, how do I carry that legacy on? And I don't know. I'll figure it out one day. And I'm not in a hurry. But to share about her, she, larger than life, always full of good food, great wine, lots of dancing, lots of love. She loved humanity very well. She knew who she was. And she lived in all those cultures, and so she was very much a cultured girl. Spoke 3 different languages. And
oh.
Yeah, because she was raised in those countries, you know. She wasn't truly American. I remember Teighlor. Remember when we came back from the States and she wanted to live here and she was just 20. And she just didn't fit in. She was like, Mom, I just don't fit in. I can't relate, you know. Mm-hmm. And then we went back and forth, you know, from Spain to here, and she found her rhythm. She found her way. She learned how to adapt well, and she loved well. Oh, my word. She would listen well, love well. She became a massage therapist and was quite the healer. She would say, you know, Mom, the people that come to me, they don't know that every time I go in to lay my hands on them, I pray, make my hands go where they need to go to help heal this person's body. And I think that's so beautiful. Like a silent healer, she truly was.
What a woman.
Yeah. Wanted to read something that I thought I would share with you guys, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Because when you're in grief, you often feel like you don't belong. And we know that everybody loves to belong. And I love that what Brene Brown writes here in her book, Braving the Wilderness. And she says, true belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. For true belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to simply be who you are. That's true belonging. And so if I equate that, if I could say true belonging is a spiritual practice, I would say grief is a practice in learning how to believe and belong to myself. I'm not okay about grief, but I'm okay in grief. There's a difference. I don't love what grief does to me. I don't love that I'm a grieving mother.
Yeah.
But I do love the practice of what it does when I allow myself to grieve in a healthy way. And even if I grieve in an unhealthy way, I don't want to put any framework of, or even like judgment, that's healthy, that's unhealthy. For one person, it's one way, and for another, it's another. Mm-hmm. Grief is just grief. Not to be denied, but truly to be embraced.
Well, we're big Brene Brown fans here.
Oh.
So you're talking our language.
I want to be her best friend.
I think we all do. Right?
Oh my gosh, it's so fun because I wanted to. There's so many, and I love reading. There's so many things that I've read and learned, and this was what I wanted to share on the podcast today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, As far as any other materials that you would recommend, do you have other tools or advice? You talked about the breathing method, so that's helpful.
David Kessler is one of my favorites, and he wrote a book called Finding Meaning, and I did my my understudy with him to be a grief educator coach through David Kessler. I think anything he's ever written is fantastic, and
he's a well-known guy.
He's amazing. We just did earlier today a session. I think so. Anything he has to write or to say. Also, I believe for me, the rhythm of daily reading a grief devotion was like a mini page, and there are different ones out there. That was enough for me in the very beginning, just to be able to read about grief and then meditate on it. I have a really good one called Grief Day by Day, which takes you through the 7 days of the week, and on the 7th day it gives you practical applications to the concept of grief. So I truly love practical reading on grief. There's so much out there, but I think that a tool for somebody to take from this podcast is find something you can read every day that's just a little bit, and then if you can read more. I mean, I've done a lot of research in different literature and also different shows and different podcasts, and I think the key is for anybody, if you don't know where to go, sit with yourself and ask yourself, what do I need? Where can I get that? And reach out to the closest people to you that you trust. And usually there you'll be able to be steered in the right way. Because some people don't like grief circles. They will not heal in a grief circle. Other people love them. Some people can't read, but they'll listen to a podcast. Other people love to write in a journal. Other people want to draw. Some people want to move and do somatics. Other people don't want to be touched. It's completely diverse. But what I do know is that grief is organic.
Thank you for sharing this part about your heart and where you are. And thank you for sharing about your beautiful child. And just appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting me. I wish I wasn't so tender today, but I am.
Yeah, I think authentic.
And I told Teighlor, I said, I'm just going to come as I am.
Yeah, you started that. That's what you want. Wholehearted, authentic living. So thanks.
That's your message anyway.
Yeah, that is you.
In this, you become more yourself.
Yeah. And I don't want to be here. Like, I do not want to be in grief. Who does?
Yeah.
Right? Like, the truth is, no, I don't want to be here. But I am. So how am I going to get up every day and look at myself in the mirror and be me in the midst of that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for inviting us next to your couch today.
Yeah, thank you. I learned a lot from you. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so grateful.
But thank you so much. I'm truly, truly honored that you would join us and share about Shira and your experience. So,
yeah,
I really do appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Once again, thank you for joining us today. Please remember to rate, share, and subscribe to our podcast. And thank you for listening to Asking for a Friend.
Let us know what you thought of the episode. Our email is hello@afafpodcast.com. This show is for educational purposes only and is copyrighted. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. Thanks for listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc.